Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you feel the way that you feel? If you're like me or like most people, I think you ponder these questions from time to time, especially when what you want to do doesn't match up with the actual actions that you take. You say you want to do something that's good for you, but you end up doing things that are bad for you. You say you want to start a new healthy habit, but you end up doing the exact opposite. And sometimes, maybe, taking these actions that are counter to what you say you want or need leads to some type of spiraling where you get down on yourself, and that leads to more negative decisions. But what if the answer to get out of these cycles of self doubt and self sabotage wasn't just psychological, but it's based on the structure of how you're built? Welcome to Change Made Easy. Changing your habits, routines, and behaviors is hard. We make it easy. I'm Paul Leviton, and I help high achievers just like you who feel stuck to bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Traditional self help doesn't work. It's either too rigid, too generic, or too overwhelming. My approach is different. I simplify change by making it so easy it can't not happen. Using my easier framework, I'll help you create habits, routines, and behaviors that stick so you can stop struggling and start thriving. It's that easy. Today, we're digging into what's behind your anxiety, your emotional triggers, and even your self sabotage. And then, with a newfound sense of understanding, we give you control over your actions and your emotions. And that's why I'm so excited for you to meet today's guest, Rogers Follansbee. Rogers brings decades of experience and a powerful new framework that redefines what mental wellness really is. Rogers is the author of the book It's Not Your Fault, and he is a pioneer in the system that he calls structured psychology, a theory of human behavior built around three core pillars that explain not just what we do, but why we do it. His work offers an integrated foundational view of the mind that challenges everything you think you know about choice, responsibility, and change. In this conversation, we discuss why the fear of being wrong might be the deepest threat to your well-being and what you can do about it. This conversation is deep, philosophical, and practical all at once. So get ready to see yourself in a whole new way. And remember, it's not your fault with Rogers Follansbee. What is structured psychology?
In a nutshell, it's a new theory for understanding human behavior, and it denotes three basic fundamental pillars of human psychological life, and that forms a kind of structure. So that's why we're talking about structured psychology. We learn very quickly when it's researched that we are relational beings. So nothing can exist without that thing being in relationship with something else. So it's a basic, fundamental, existential requirement. And the other thing is that we find out is continuation, the continuation of our existence. It's a requirement. It is a logical requirement. If one thinks that something cannot be and not continue being what it is, at the same time, you realize that there is an implicit, not spoken about or not that conscious of a power within us that's pushing us constantly, but something that's innate to our existence itself. That is, we innately continue to exist and want to continue to exist. There's no instinct involved in wanting to continue living, for example, or existing, for example. It's the same thing. And that means that anything that would threaten that continuation is going to affect us psychologically. And because we are living human beings, not just existing things, the third element, or the third pillar, if you wish, is the kind of echo we get from our relational experience, from other things and other people.
Could you explain to me the distinction you just made between living and existing?
Yes, for example, the teacup that may be close by to you exists, but it's not alive. We need animation and we need relationships that are in tune, living relationships, in order to say that life exists, and therefore there is a consciousness, there is an awareness in the most basic of understandings. One cell amoebas are not conscious, but they are aware of their surroundings. They are aware that they are in relationship with the outside world, everything that is not those amoebas, those amoeba cells. So even down to the simplest existing thing that is alive, that has animation to it, we call it a living thing.
So you said that the first pillar, or maybe the three pillars, I don't know if one comes first or second or third, or they're all just
No, they're all
existed.
simultaneous. They're all
Yeah,
simultaneous.
simultaneously. Okay. But when you said existence is a relational, is relational, it's a relational event. And when I hear that, I think of it in two ways. So I think of this as well. Something I talk about a lot is that nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything is connecting to
Correct.
everything. And whenever we're talking about change, especially, so I talk about changing your behaviors, changing your habits, and people will think about a certain habit as if it exists by itself. So it's like, okay, I'm going to change the way I eat, as if the way you eat isn't involved with your social life and your family life and all of these other things. And when we look at
Yeah.
it just as if it were this one simple thing, that's what tends to trip us up. Or when you're talking about existence being a relational event, do you mean specifically in the interpersonal way, as in like no man is an island and
No.
we're all? So how are you thinking about relation in regards to the way you teach it?
In in our book, the "It's Not Your Fault," there's a an example of just that, which we refer back, and it may be time not that timely, because we refer back to a film done by Tom Hanks, which was Castaway. And very simply, he was alone with no other living thing like a human being near him. There were living things, but not like that. So he became very involved relationally with one of the things that was saved from an airplane crash that landed him on this island, and that was a basketball, Wilson brand. That was a big push for Wilson, I'm sure. But he carried on his life reflecting virtually with this very dead, not alive, and yet existing object, which was this basketball. And he had conversations with it, and he disputed things with it, and he asked it questions, and so on and so forth. So it's that kind of relationship. Relationships can happen in a very direct way, like I'm having a relationship with you now because you're there and I can see you, or they can be virtual. I can remember what I said to you, and you can remember what you said to me. That would be a virtual relationship. But even things that are not alive require that they be in relationship with everything they are not. That is to say, the world that surrounds them.
So you mentioned your book just now, and I know your book is it's not your fault, which I have linked in the show notes for anyone listening to go check out that book right now, which I highly recommend. But my question, and I think the inherent question that anyone would have when hearing that, if it's not my fault, then whose fault is it?
All right. When I use that title simply to touch buttons, switches, that is to say, it wakes us up to something that we're all concerned with, and that is, what is our responsibility in the life we're living? And many times we're accused of being at fault for this or being at fault for that. And indeed, by reading the book, you will discover and see why it is that really the reason why we behave the way we do is because that's the way we're structured. And that's the way anything that exists is structured. You can't be structured in any more of a basic way. You can be structured in all kinds of other ways that are peripheral to this. But the very basic fundamental structure of the way we all live, the way we react psychologically to the world around us, is in those 3 points. That is to say, we don't have a choice. It isn't though when we talk about free choice, for example, that's something we shoot down very early. because there is no such. There's always a determinant. There's something that guides us in one direction or another to make the choices we make. So it's in that sense that it is not something that you decide to do. For example, if you have an anger issue, you don't wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to really screw with everybody that's around here and be angry with everyone. No, it's not your fault that you're angry. It's the fault of the relational connection that you have with the world around you that has made you that way. There's a reason why you feel the way you do, and it's structural.
So I can understand why that would push some buttons because part of that I am right on board with you, right? It's like everything happens for a reason, and as you said, like nothing comes from nothing. Everything comes from something, in a sense, especially negative attributes, right? We have anything that we do is comes from there. There's a reason in our subconscious that we would do that, or something in our past that has led to that, and I get that. But on the other side of that coin, isn't agency like the deepest fundamental human right? Like the right to be the masters of our own destiny and drive our own ship. So how if we have do where do we fall if everything is a spectrum, are we completely out of control, and are we just at the whims of the universe, or is there still some say that we have as individuals in ch- choosing the course of our lives?
Yes, of course we do. And I think it starts with understanding how we're structured. We're able, once we understand that, to guide ourselves to the places we want to go. That is to say, we can choose goals and reach them, but they're far easier to reach knowing why we have picked that goal and what it takes to reach that goal. So if we understand how we're structured, why we behave the way we do, why we feel the way we do, think the way we do, that will help us reach the goals that we've set. Yes, we're totally in charge. We're totally in charge. But when there is a negative that's thrown at us because perhaps we're frustrated by reaching this goal because something happens to us, or there's a third element that suddenly enters our lives and stops us from, for whatever reason, reaching that goal, we can understand why it is that this has happened. Is that our fault that something has appeared to produce a stumble in our quest for whatever goal we're like? No, no, it's not. It's life. The French, c'est la vie. Well, yeah, life brings this along with it. It's part of life. The structure is part of life.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that makes me feel a little bit better. So, when you're talking about the structure that it's like you said, to understanding the structure is the first step. And, I say this as awareness, right? You have to even to be aware of the invisible hand that's guiding your life, or whatever is going on, the subconscious things, however you want to frame it. But
Yeah.
do we all have the same basic structure, or do we each have like a structure that is guiding us, so to speak, but it's unique to the individual?
All right. Here we have to be a little bit careful about using the word structure. And your question is a very good one, and it's very apropos to what we're talking about. The structure consists of one's genetic past, what we're born with, what we show up with at the door of life, so to speak. We're loaded down with tons of baggage. It's all genetic. That is part of who we are. But because we're relational beings, we have to first relate to the world around us to be who we are. So that's maybe our mother, our father, the ambience that we're born into, so on and so forth. That determines who we are in a certain sense, which is constantly changing. All right, so every experience we have changes us just a little bit because we're the sum of these things. We're the sum of who we are genetically and who we relate to, what we relate to, how we relate to the world around us. So it's this combination, this simultaneous event that then creates the whole us.
if I'm hearing correctly, it's kind of similar to like the nurture versus nature debate,
Exactly.
and that it's not either or, but both and.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I see how, again, you can't have either one. Again, going back to where we started, where nothing exists in a vacuum. It cannot.
Right.
It's neither just. People want, I think, a simple answer to a complex question, where you want it to be like, just tell me it's nature, just tell me it's nurture, just tell me it's how I'm born, just tell me it's my parents. But it's
Oh,
an amalgamation of everything.
yeah. If it were that easy.
So, now, so we see that it's a very complex issue, right? But, and I understand that, right? So there, the kind of tongue in cheek whole thing behind this podcast, right? Change made easy. So I understand that it's never going to be easy, but the goal is to make it easier, right? It's like
Right.
everything. Life is hard, creating change is hard. Anything that you're going after, any goals you set, right? You said you should have goals. It's inherent in setting goals is the fact that it's hard, because I wouldn't have to set a goal if it were easy. I wouldn't have to set a goal to tie my shoe, because I could just do it. I set a goal to become successful, to become more knowledgeable, whatever the thing is. So
Exactly.
now that we know it's complex, what are like the first steps if we want to start to build that wellness, that psychological wellness? What is the foundation that that's built on?
Um, what we found um, over the years, this psychology is really a very, very new science. So if you take it from the 1850s on to today, it was just it's you, it's a brand new outlook on life. The one thing that stands out predominantly in almost all psychological events, and ones that we feel are negative or unconstructive or just destructive, is anxiety. And anxiety is usually created by the lack of knowledge. That is to say, we feel anxious about things we feel as though we have no control over. And the feeling of not having control over something is because we don't know it. We don't understand it. We can't figure it out. Why am I saying or doing the things that I'm saying and doing? Why is Mary reacting this way? Why did I just do this other thing, or my mother or father do this other thing? I don't get it. I don't understand. This creates anxiety. And that's the first step to have a psychological problem. So if we're able to understand why we react to the things we do, that is immediately assuaged. That it's eaten away at by the knowledge that we have, that we understand how we're put together structurally, why we react to things the way we do, where that comes from, what to do about it. Knowledge is really an almost cure-all for most psychological distress.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you put it like that. I mean, that's how I ended up where I am today, because this is why I'm so endlessly fascinated with psychology and books on psychology and podcasts on psychology and human behavior, behavioral science, because it's just like this helps me understand me better, and it takes away so many of the questions. And something that I've come to understand is that, like, the need for certainty is one of the deepest human needs, and that is directly contradictory to the fact that nothing in life is certain. And that brings up, exactly as you said, anxiety. So if I'm understanding correctly, we know that we can never be certain in life, right? Like, even you can do all of the right inputs and we can't say that the output is going to be. But education or knowledge kind of serves as a stand-in for that certainty, because at least by educating yourself more, by knowing more, you can feel more certain that you are making the most informed decision. Am I taking this correctly?
No, no, yeah, absolutely. The certainty, of course, is is something we all want to be right about everything. We're born this way. Why do we want to be right about everything? Well, if we're right about everything, we can't be wrong about anything. What does it mean to be wrong about something? In the structure, we learn, and understanding the structure itself, we learn that contradiction, or what we can call also something that we feel is wrong, is not possible in our lives without psychological consequences. So every time someone tells you, no, you're wrong, Paul, that's not right, or you did this the wrong way, or this is a bad job, um, every kind of observation of this kind from those very people or those very objects from which you're gaining your life because you have to be in relationship. It's a big deal when somebody tells you that you're wrong because they're telling you there's something wrong with your life. There's something wrong with you. And this is um, this is something that you have to feel armed against. You have to feel as though you have a chance at combating this kind of attack on you. And that is what you're given by understanding the way you're structured.
It makes a lot of sense. Like you said, the feeling of wrongness, either literal, real, or not, is one of
Sure,
the worst
exactly.
feelings that we can have. And yet, logically, we know that, or at least we probably should know or understand that we're going to have to be wrong sometimes. And that brings us to, we always have these non-logical contradictions where we're like, it's like, I know that I have to be wrong and that most of the time I'm going to be wrong, and yet being wrong is the worst feeling that I could ever have, and I hate being wrong, and I never want to be wrong, and I only want to do things that I'm right. So how do we start to grapple with these non-logical contradictions?
Just the way you did right now. I mean, that was kind of a perfect example of being able to vocalize, being able to say what has happened. I don't feel well. I'm irritated. I'm nervous. I feel a little angry. Why? Many times it just happens like that. What's wrong with me? I shouted at my wife, or I yelled at my husband, or I did something with my kids, or this friend of mine. And where did that come from? It came from a contradiction, just what you paralleled with being wrong. We never seek wrongness. That's not something we seek. We seek always to be correct and right, not make mistakes, but rather make progress. So it is, again, if you're able to see that, all right, someone has said that I'm wrong. Am I wrong? Well, in their eyes, I am. Why? I'm relating to that person and they're telling me I'm wrong. That's a contradiction. That person is part of me because I'm in relationship with them. And yet part of me is telling me that I'm wrong. That's a direct contradiction. My intention or my goal was not to be wrong, but to be right about what I was saying. But they've said, no, no, Paul, Rogers, you're wrong. That's not correct. That's a contradiction, and we have to deal with that. That is going to have a consequence. The consequence is going to make me feel anxious, upset, nervous, angry. Any number of psychological emotions are going to pass by me, and I'm going to feel them. And the very best thing I can do is understand where they came from and how to deal with them and why. Why am I doing this?
So you said that we don't ever do anything with the intention to be wrong. I'm curious if you think that that is potentially a negative thing. We talk about a lot failure as feedback and learning from your failures and things like that. But we have inside of us, again, this inherent need to be right. So is the our striving to never be wrong actually holding us back in the long run?
I don't think anyone takes that very seriously. I mean, this is in the sense that never we never want to be wrong. But lately, as you know, last 10 or 15 years, they've been making a real effort out of trying to convince people how valuable being wrong really is, just how forward pushing it can be to recognize the error that you've made, and then work on that to make it better, to improve. And absolutely, I totally agree with that. As long as you understand from a structural point of view what being wrong really means psychologically. if you understand that it is a kind of contradiction, that the feedback that you're getting from the objects or the people, they're all objects as well, with whom you have a relationship, you want that to be a positive relationship. They want you to have a building relationship, a constructive relationship with that person. Being wrong is not constructive unless you understand that it can be. So it's how the perspective you take on life in general. If it's from a structural standpoint, you can get through it. But if it isn't, if you don't know why you're thinking the way you think, if you feel the way you feel, if you doing something that you don't understand, that is just going to add to the struggle that you're going through instead of taking it away. So understanding how we're structured is a very useful tool to have in that case that you just, for example, mentioned, which means that if when you make an error, can you see a positive side to that? Yeah, that's a contradiction. So I want to get over that. I want to go for my goal, which is being right, which is getting it right and building this machine or doing this project. So as long as you understand that that's what you're doing, you're home free.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. It kind of, to me, as you're talking, it boils down to, can you take the kind of sting out of it, right? Just because you're wrong doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It can be objective, where it's just like, yeah, like objectively I set a goal to achieve this goal and I didn't get it. So that can be true. Like, I was wrong about doing X, Y, and Z would take me to the end of this, where I was trying to go. But that doesn't have to mean that there's something fundamentally flawed about me. And if I can separate those two, then I can start to see like the being wrong as a positive, an area of growth, as opposed to something about me that's going to further send me down a negative spiral.
Exactly. That is to say, the knowledge that you just expressed to me about knowing that there is a positive, there can be, there isn't always, obviously, that's just the problem, but there is the potential for error to be a very positive experience. And I think that is not only taking that as a bit of rote material, that is to say, I'll just keep repeating it. I'll look myself
Mhm.
in the mirror like they used to do back in the 50s and say, this is the way it is. And, maybe I'll believe it. No, if you understand how you're structured and how life is structured, then you can understand the true value of that which you've said. That is to say, that error and mistakes can be very, very positive if you understand them in that light.
So I have a question. With your background, you've been in the field of psychology for several decades. I don't know exactly when you
Yeah.
you first started, but I would think 30 plus 40 years maybe. So, and as you said, the last 10, 15 years especially, there's been this big push. Podcasts have exploded, YouTube has exploded, the field of quote unquote pop psychology, with all of these books, the Malcolm Gladwells and the this, that, and the other thing. I'd be curious of what's something that you believe, or something that you maybe have written about, that is counter to what is commonly out there in the psychological zeitgeist.
What I found very early on, especially when this theory was slowly but surely developed, was that the things that we think we know about psychological us have no foundation in reality. They're just really, really clever, good guesses. And they are of any number of, I'm sure you've studied them, any number of the psychologists that you've become familiar with have views and perspectives and ideas that are simply brilliant, but they're not based upon, I would almost say, mathematical logic. They're based on very well supported guesswork. So the main tool that one has to find to discover, to uncover the mysteries that we go through in life is to understand, again, how we're put together and how we're really put together. Not because it's an idea I had. It's something that was pushed on me because of the reality that it is. So when you see how we're structured and you fully understand that, then everything seems to fall into place. That is to say, if all of a sudden you feel nervous or you're starting to be over concerned about a certain issue, if you know how you're pieced together psychologically, you can in an instant figure out where that comes from, and therefore what to deal with, where to go to deal with that particular cause in a cause and effect relationship. It's just that we have no assurance. The, the psychologists that all of us have been creating our theories on and following and repeating constantly over the years really haven't given us a firm foundation, something that will never go away and that you can always count on. You'll find that every single psychological theory has its exceptions. And sometimes they're numerous, they're all over the place. So you will find that in the basic structure, there are no exceptions. There are all exceptions. That is to say, everything can happen under that structure that you can possibly imagine, but there is a reason for it. And the reason always comes back to the structure itself. It doesn't go off on a tangent. It doesn't go over here on another theory. It doesn't refer to something that has nothing to do with what we were saying before. No, it is all referential to the way we're structured. And the way we're structured is an extremely logical fashion. So it all can come back to that center.
Yeah, I'm right there with you because exactly, right? As you read through any psychological textbook or any book or just hear about any theory or anything like that, it's like, well, it's always like this, except when it's like that. And
Yeah.
like most of the time it's like this, except for the times where it's like over there.
Mhm.
So when you then, if I'm understanding it, in the structure that you've created, it takes all of those exceptions into account. So rather
Yeah.
than it being outside of the scope of it, it's all under one umbrella.
Exactly. The problem that the way this was developed very briefly was I was trying to do a doctoral thesis on projection. Now, projection we all know about. It's something that every psychologist in the world discusses and wonders about and uses as examples and on and on. But I found that there was absolutely nothing out there in the world of psychology that could explain projection. And what happened as a result was exactly what you're describing. That is to say, the the goal of reaching a true explanation of this particular psychological phenomena, which is projection, required that you go back to ground zero, just the beginning of everything, because there would always be an exception. Anything you came up with that seemed to explain projection, but not in this case over here. Everything over here, but not in this other case over there. So that's what you want to get away from. You're trying to find something that is all inclusive. And that's why the structure works the way it works.
So, we've talked about the structure. You in the beginning, you highlighted the three pillars, and obviously we've talked about it a lot throughout this conversation. But I'm just curious for people listening, right? You have a book. I'm sure the book goes into things in much more
Yeah,
detail. But if you
sure.
had like a 5-minute elevator pitch of like what it is on a super high level, so people can understand like why is this what it is and why it's worth them diving into deeper.
Well, I think, again, it's from the very first thing that I said to you when we began this conversation. Anxiety. Anxiety is something that pops into our lives and we don't know why it's there. And for whatever reason, you will always find that anxiety enters our lives when there is a contradiction. So if we're able to get a hold and control that contradiction, we're able to control our own lives and assess and take hold of, if you wish, of that very thing that is bothering us as much as it is, which is anxiety. So the very first thing is, again, knowledge. If we know how we work, how we're put together, and so is everybody else, that anxiety will be identified immediately, and you'll go to the cause and you'll deal with the cause. Otherwise, you'll just continue anxious, upset, which will create more anxiety because you don't understand where this is coming from. You don't understand why you feel anxious, what to do about it. Whereas if you understand how you're structured, you'll be able to know that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That hits home for me. This is how I relate this to everyone. I say this is to me exactly like you said, this is the beginning of everything. Do you feel in control of your life? If you do, life is good, and if you don't, life is bad. I think that all anxiety, all sadness, fear, everything comes from a sense of being out of control. I call it being in the passenger seat in life
Right.
versus being in the driver's seat. In the driver's seat, you're in control. You might get lost, but at least you're in the driver's seat. But if you're lost and you're in the passenger seat and you have no control over when to turn, when to stop, you can't stop yourself from veering off the road. It's just a very unsafe way to be and an unsafe way to feel. So I completely understand where you're saying like knowledge just coming in with the knowledge of how to structure the structure that you're built on so that you can get out of anxiety and start to feel at a place of more control in your life, how that could start to change everything. So I really do appreciate you sharing that, Rogers. The last two questions I have are the same two questions that I ask all my guests, and the first is, what is the change that you want to see in the world?
Um, how much time do you have?
As
Uh,
long as you want.
no, I think there's a laundry list that each one of us has that we'd like to see changed. And it would be changing according to the perspective that we have. I think each one of us can create our kind of perfect world. So the list that I would give you would be Roger's list, my list, but that might not be your list. That might be a whole different list. There may be some coincidence between one or two things, but and I think that one of the things that always concerned me as something that needed changes was understanding. I think knowledge, although I fear that we're moving further and further away from that, is an enormously valuable tool to have. And it doesn't have to be knowledge that you acquire after 8 years of university. No, this is something that you can acquire at your home, sitting in your lounge chair and reading about every once in a while, or someone that you know that understands the kinds of problems that you're having and why you're having them. Whoever it is will give you that control. And what we're trying to control is contradiction. That is to say, when contradiction appears, and appears every day in one way or the other, and sometimes there are enormous contradictions, and other times we say, boy, I had a really good day today. There are very few contradictions, but they're there, and they're there on a daily basis. So if you're able to deal with those contradictions, that's your first step to this happiness that we're all looking for, which is simply an annihilation of the contradictions we meet.
I love that. And it kind of leads right into my last question. And my last question is always, if you had one action step that you could leave listeners with that they could take right now, today, as soon as this episode ends, as soon as they take their headphones out, to start making any change that they're trying to make just a little bit easier, what action could they take?
They can learn how they're put together, what makes them tick, what makes me think, feel, and do the things I do. And that is the goal of this book that I wrote, which it's not your fault. It's right. It's a very short book. You can read it in an afternoon. It's not an intellectual struggle, but it does give you the knowledge and the wherewithal and the tools you need to be in control of everything. You understand why your life is the way it is and why the life of others is the way those lives are. Which is just a basic, I think, a basic tool that we should all have. We should all be equipped with this resource that we can apply when we feel down and we don't know why. Well, where is this coming from? What am I, why am I doing the things I'm doing? Why did I think that or feel that? Um, Knowing why is just fundamental.